Kia ora, I'm Erica Wilkinson, and this is the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. Kia ora, ko Erica Wilkinson tēnei. He kōnei I purangi tēnei e pā ana ki ngā Sounds of Science. Every episode, we talk about work being done behind the scenes by Doc's technical experts, scientists, rangers, and the experts in between. Today on the show, we have Hollei Gabrielsen, Technical Advisor at the Department of Conservation, who specialises in volcanology. Hollei provides advice on volcanic matters, unrest, risk, and eruptions. Kia ora, Hollei. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Tēnā koe, Erica. O tira kia tātou, te hunga e whakarongo ana ki tēnei punua pāoho. Ko Tongariro te maunga, ko tauponui atia te moana, ko Ngāti Tūwharetoa te iwi, ko te heuheu te tangata, ko Hollei Gabrielsen tōku ingoa. Kia ora, Erica. Kia ora, everyone who's listening to this today. My name's Hollei. I hail from Ngāti Tūwharetoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Hollei. Haere mai. Welcome to the show. As you know, ko Erica tēnei, kei te papa atawhai ahau e mahi ana. So we have to start here with a simple question that's actually sneaky hard question in disguise. What is a volcano?
So a volcano is where magma erupts at the surface in its most basic form and forms a volcano.
So can you tell us about the three types of volcano?
Yes, I can. So I'll start with the volcanoes in Tongariro National Park. So those volcanoes are shield volcanoes or stratovolcanoes, and they are formed over many hundreds of thousands of years and are formed from volcanic deposits such as ash and lava, and they're basically just layered on top of each other through eruptions. And then I'll fast forward to calderas because I grew up in Taupo. If people aren't aware, Lake Taupo is a caldera. Calderas are formed through really infrequent but violent eruptions where the majority of the magma chamber that sits beneath the volcano is expelled to the surface, and because there's no more body within the mountain collapses in on itself and creates a crater that eventually fills up with water. And we have a number of caldera volcanoes right from Lake Taupo through to Rotorua. So volcanic fields is another example of a type of volcano, and more commonly known in Auckland, but there are also volcanic fields in Northland as well. And so a volcanic field is just an area or a location where volcanoes can be formed. And what's quite unique about a volcano field is that a volcano was formed through one eruption, and then that's that for that volcano. So in Auckland, there might be approximately 50 volcanoes that have, occurred in Auckland.
So if I live in Tamaki Makaurau, could I wake up one morning and accidentally suddenly see that there's a volcano next to me that wasn't there yesterday?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question and a very real question that possibly many Aucklanders would be asking. It's a very low probability for an eruption to occur in Auckland, but that's not to say that at some point in the future, whether that's within our lifetime or hundreds of years into the future.
Now, I know your whakapapa is really central to your work. Hollei, can you tell us about your role at Te Papa Atawhai, the Department of Conservation?
My main role at Te Papa Atawhai is to provide technical advice to decision makers on all things pertaining to our volcanoes, particularly in Tongariro National Park.
Now, Tongariro is an important place for you in your work. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I guess for us as Māori, we link directly to a mountain. And so for me, as someone from Ngāti Tūwharetoa, the first line I utter in my pepeha is ko Tongariro te maunga. And so that directly centres me in a geographical location, and it tells you that I am linked through whakapapa to my mountain. And so it's really cool to have a role with the department that actively works alongside and intimately with my maunga. I guess for me as a wahine Māori, that centres me as a person in our environment. So the creation story that we link to really shows the origins of where people fit into the world And for me, because I whakapapa directly to the volcanoes in Central North Island, it really helps to centre me as a person in my role with Te Papa Atawhai.
I don't know if you know, but Lonely Planet have a World's Coolest Jobs book, and alongside snake venom collector and astronaut, it's volcanologist. So please tell me, what does a volcanologist do? Can you tell me about your average day and the purpose of your work?
I can tell you what the average volcanologist, whose name is Hollei, does every day. And I guess because the role that I have with Te Papa Atawhai is advisory. So really it's around recommending what are some appropriate decisions relating to visitors accessing the volcanoes and sites within Tongariro National Park. So what I would typically do on a day, and I go, this really will speak to the geek inside. So a lot of it is reviewing, understanding, researching the evolution of our mountains. So I don't do the work like that. I will utilise the work that researchers from universities have done to inform the decisions that I will be advocating for our decision makers. So that's kind of one part. Another part that I like to do quite regularly is also to incorporate the te ao Māori side of who Hollei is. And so, and I utilise those kind of, they're not frameworks, but they are po in my whare, so that I know who I am, I know which research I need to lean on, I know how to be Māori in a science kind of world, which is sometimes not as easy to be your full self. And so I utilise those kinds of resources to support me to do my work.
That's awesome. Are you the only volcanologist at DOC?
I am.
Wow.
Lonely, isn't it?
The responsibility. It's insane. So kind of by observation, it doesn't seem like there are a lot of wahine Māori volcanologists. Do you find that your perspective is pretty unique in the field?
Yeah, I think being Māori, that is, you bring something different to the table when you're in an environment with other scientists. I think also being a woman and who's Māori, who is a volcanologist, you bring a collection of perspectives and experiences to the table that, men don't have, or Pākehā people or people from, other countries don't typically have. So I think I've learnt to, lean on those parts of myself and use that to inform the way I approach work and approach life generally.
Do you think your perspective and understanding does really affect your approach to your work?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing about working for the department, so working for Te Papa Atawhai, and really leaning into how to be, how does the department be an active and very good treaty partner to iwi Māori. And so having the capabilities and the pukenga that I have naturally through, just being Māori and growing up in the environment that I did, I think that in itself is very special, and it's not something that I favour. Like a conference that we held at the start of the year in Rotorua. So we didn't hold, I attended, but it was a collection of international volcanologists that met in Rotorua for a week at the start of this year. And I was asked to speak at the opening ceremony, and that's like 800 people who know nothing about te iwi Māori. I guess majority of the attendees were from all over the world. And so I took that opportunity to, tell a story about who we are as Māori and how we connect to our natural landscape, particularly to our volcanoes, more so to articulate that you're coming to our special places. There are a group of people throughout New Zealand that tie in and link intimately to their specific volcano or their specific mountain. And I guess I really wanted to just make sure that people were aware of how special these places are, so that when they come to our rohe, they come to our volcanoes, that they treat them with respect.
And at that conference, would you say that would alter the approach for geoscientists once you mentioned that?
I think the intention is that exposing them to a relationship that exists between a group of people and their volcanic ancestor can help shape the way that they approach, for example, research. So I've observed in the past scientists who have come to Tongariro National Park, as well as the surrounds that don't encompass the kind of rules and that are in place with taking samples. But I've observed scientists pull out their glad bag and help themselves to the whenua. And I think even just from a Māori perspective, you're removing something from that location, you are taking that away and you are never bringing it back. And I suppose those are the things that I wanted to encourage people to just be more mindful of.
That's really important. I hope that really got across for our international visitors and geoscientists. Hollei, you must have many amazing field stories. I bet you get to do a lot of pretty cool stuff. Has there been a most memorable day at work? Could you tell me about?
Yes, I guess the one that comes to mind is my first visit to Te Waiamoi. Te Waiamoi is the crater lake on Mount Ruapehu, and myself and other colleagues were accompanying some researchers who were researching the stability of the crater rim. And what was most memorable about that particular day at work was how large and scary those kinds of locations can be. And I think the thing that really stuck with me is how small I felt in that environment. So, you drive down Te Hau one and you look at the mountain and it looks like a mountain, but once you're in the environment, the scale is really, really different. And I just felt like an ant, walking on a rock. And it was quite, I didn't move far from where the helicopter dropped me off. Wow. And I sat there and was like, oh, you guys good? Yeah, sweet. Well, I will remain here until the helicopter comes back and picks me up.
Because in 2020, it heated and then cooled again, didn't it? Does that happen often?
Yeah, so cooling and heating cycles are typical at Te Waiamoi, and so they happen quite often. Even today, the temperature, I think, is around 16 or so degrees, and it's really evident of what is happening beneath the volcano. And so the temperature at Te Waiamoi is just an indicator on what is happening beneath the mountain.
Now for my new favourite segment of the show, the questions from listeners. We had a bunch of these come in, asked on our Instagram stories. Everyone wants to know lots of things about volcanoes. So I will ask you a few. Are volcanoes mountains?
Yes, volcanoes are mountains, but not all mountains are volcanoes. And I think the interesting thing there is that how they are formed will determine whether or not it's a volcano. So if magma has erupted and formed that as a mountain, then yes, it is a mountain.
Okay, that's a good structure to understand. How many volcanoes do we have in Aotearoa?
Heck, there's heaps of volcanoes in New Zealand, actually, but a lot of them are incredibly old. So we even have volcanoes in the South Island, but they're in the millions of years old and possibly haven't erupted in such a long time. There are roughly 8 active volcanic areas in New Zealand.
Interesting. This is from a listener. I read most of Aotearoa's volcanic eruptions in the past 100 years have been phreatic. First, what's phreatic? And secondly, is it possible to predict an eruption?
Good question. So phreatic eruptions are really steam explosions that occur. So heat from the magma or the magma interacting with groundwater or a volcanic lake can cause these kinds of eruptions. So they're quite common at Mount Ruapehu. And the second question was,
is it possible to predict?
Yeah, I think there's a difficulty there. They are really hard to predict. And volcanic eruptions generally, you can't pinpoint it's going to happen at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And so in response to the unpredictability of phreatic eruptions, for example, the Department of Conservation, in partnership with GeoNet, have an established eruption detection system on the mountain to, I guess, mitigate that particular eruption style.
Can you tell me about the volcanic alert level system?
So the volcanic alert level system is a mechanism that helps people understand the level of unrest at the volcanoes in New Zealand. So unrest is really described through 3 levels, starting at 0, inferring that there's no volcanic unrest occurring at a mountain, at a volcano. Level 1, volcanic alert level 1, infers that minor unrest is present at that volcano. Level 2 is moderate to heightened volcanic unrest. And then, so we're moving from unrest through to eruption. And so eruption also has 3 scales, starting at 3, which is a minor or smaller eruption. That really means the eruption hazards that occur at that volcano are kind of located around the vent. And as the eruption sizes increase, it really scales up.
Okay. And instead of just asking the expert on the podcast, how can I find out myself if there is likely to be a volcanic eruption in, say, the Banks Peninsula where I live?
Good question. I think the best location to go for any information about volcanoes, particularly around the monitoring side, GeoNet has a website as well as an app. And so GeoNet are responsible for monitoring natural hazards around the country. So their website as well as their app has, a myriad of information from earthquakes, landslides through to volcanoes. It's a great place to go to help grow your understanding of our country.
Fantastic. We in Canterbury use GeoNet a lot. Now, DOC has 3 visitor-accessible volcanoes on public conservation land. All 3 are in Tongariro National Park, which is your whakapapa and your expertise. Is that right?
It is, yes.
Now, specifically talking about visitors, what should people do before they go on a walk in Tongariro National Park?
Being informed around the level of volcanic unrest, particularly at our volcanoes within Tongariro National Park, is probably a good place to start. Other ways that you can source data, the Department of Conservation has a website that discusses volcanic risk management, and that has a lot of good information on how we actively mitigate volcanic risk to the public.
So visitors can't learn if something's going to erupt from our website, but what you can find out is how to be prepared for going out into the wilderness and to know before you go, know where you're going. But there is no chance of mitigating volcanic eruptions to 0. Is that right?
So the Department of Conservation cannot mitigate volcanic risk to 0. That's correct. And so how we manage the risk that's left over, per se, is that we have an eruption detection system on our mountains, and so that informs us of an eruption. But aside from that, we have, processes and systems in place that allow us as the team that manages those locations to make the appropriate decisions around whether or not sites can be accessed or not. But I guess for the visitor who is visiting our locations, being informed around the current level of unrest, understanding that they are coming to visit an active volcanic landscape is probably a really good thing to know. And interestingly, not many people know that it's a volcano or that there are volcanoes in Tongariro National Park.
So if people are going out recreationally around active volcano sites, there is the possibility of having no warning around an eruption. Does that sound right?
Yes. So eruptions can happen at our volcanoes within Tongariro National Park with little to no warning. And I think that really articulates the power of our volcanoes and how prepared we need to be when we are accessing our tracks in Tongariro National Park.
Absolutely. So always be aware that that's the kind of ecosystem that you're around.
Yeah, and I think just being really vigilant around, we're here walking on an active volcanic landscape. How do I keep my wits about me?
That leads me on to, how do I keep my wits about me? What is the best way to protect yourself during an eruption?
Because eruptions can create a number of different volcanic hazards or volcanic phenomena, understanding perhaps the behaviour or style of an eruption at the particular volcano you're visiting might help inform you how to be prepared. For example, Mount Ruapehu is known for its laha. And so laha are volcanic mud flows that flow particularly down the Whangahu catchment, which is on the northeastern side of Ruapehu. understanding that that is a phenomena you may encounter if you're traversing in that location, knowing that if I hear the sound of boulders crashing, please do not stay within the base of those riverbeds, move to higher ground, get yourself out of the valley and move to higher ground. So that's probably the best way you can be prepared if you ever encounter a laha. For the likes of ballistics, which are rocks that are thrown out of the mountain, of the volcano during an eruption, the safest way to respond will be if you can find a rock to shelter behind, use your pack if you have one, and use that to cover your head, facing away from the mountain to keep yourself safe. So those are kind of ways that you can help protect yourself. But what I will say is that the closer you are to any volcanic vent, the higher the consequence.
That makes sense. Now, a laha channel, in my head, that looks like, in a film, there's lava coming down the mountain. Is that what that is?
A laha is a volcanic mud flow. So think of it like a mixture of water, volcanic debris, rocks, and so it sometimes has a consistency like concrete, and it varies, and it's depending on how much water content it has. It's really like a large flood that has the potential to cause a lot of damage, but also has the potential to carry so many large boulders right from the top of the mountain down the landscape.
Is it hot?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
And I guess it will depend, how we talked about the temperature cycling at Te Waiamoi, which I guess if we look at a typical temperature range that we experience at Ruapehu might be between 12 to 15 degrees at the lower end and 40 degrees at the higher end. But irrespective of the temperature of the crater lake, it's mostly cold. Maybe at other volcanoes, I'm not too sure if that means that they might be hot, but...
Now, as Doc's only volcanologist and with such wonderful connection to this role, you must have many career highlights. Would you mind telling us about one of them?
I've talked about it earlier. One of the experiences that I have that, while it's not particularly something that I enjoy doing, the opening ceremony at the IFSA conference in Rotorua was probably quite memorable because it provided me with an opportunity to share more about who I am and the importance of being Māori, working for Te Papa Atawhai at the location that I'm so privileged to be able to work at. And even though public speaking, it's really something that I have to learn. I have to learn to get used to, and I think saying yes to things like that just helps me grow individually as well as represent both, Te Papa Atawhai and my people better when I can tell the stories that I can tell.
I've heard someone say before, it's the cause is bigger than your ego. So if you're stressed and nervous about something, it doesn't matter because you have to advocate for it. But it's never easy. It sounds like really bucket list stuff. Segueing into maybe not so bucket list stuff, what has been your strangest day at work?
I've had some strange days, but I wouldn't call it strange. It would just be another experience that helped me to grow. And so when I say helped me to grow, it means that it was a little bit on the scary side of life. So previously, when I started with the department, I was in secondment and I used to follow Harry Keys around. And so for the listeners that know Harry Keys, he's a specialist on volcanoes and on ice. And so we had the opportunity, myself and my colleague Theo had the opportunity to head up on Ruapehu to the summit plateau and explore some of the ice caves up there. Again, it's like my memorable experience up at Te Waiamoi, and I think it was just really, I sat there and was like, I'm really scared. I don't know ice. I don't know the mountains. I'm not a mountain climber, but it was really cool to be with someone who knew how to do this, who led the way, who allowed me time to be comfortable. And, we got to explore the glacier on the top of the mountain. It was really, really cool and scary. And then we walked down and that was hard.
Oh, that does sound hard. Oh, wow. That sounds quite scary, especially if you don't know the terrain, know the ice.
Oh, it's just new experiences, I think,
Yeah.
and being okay with being uncomfortable, but also having confidence that you're with people that know what they're doing.
Yeah, and trusting in the science. Okay, we've heard about bat nipples. We've heard about mucus being shot as a defense mechanism. What is your favorite weird and wonderful nature fact?
So I guess when you're a child and you explore what volcanoes are, you typically draw your Mount Ngāti and you draw lava, lava flowing down the side of the mountain. And that's our understanding of what volcanoes are and how eruptions occur. So I was talking to one of my friends a while ago when I was doing my master's around volcanic phenomena. And I remember her saying, oh my gosh, is there lava everywhere? And so we've already learnt that, phreatic eruptions don't necessarily include or expel lava from the mountain, but they are, they're a steam explosion. So those are interesting facts for me to help people understand that not all volcanic eruptions are your typical from a beautiful, picturesque mountain where lava just flows down, down the sides of the mountain. So I think helping people understand that eruptions and volcanoes are actually really complex. They have their own typical behaviours, and once you learn about them, you get to know them a little bit more. You get to know their likes and dislikes.
And that it's not just the stereotype lava coming down a mountain.
I don't know if that's an interesting fact, but it's interesting that, people's observations of volcanoes are just that, eh?
Well, yeah, and as soon as you scratch the surface, you start learning about them, that's not all it is. I would say that is a holy crap fact.
There's heaps, volcanoes are weird, Do you know about lahar? I mean, we've learned about what lahars are, and the interesting thing about lahar, specifically at Mount Ruapehu, is that they don't always occur with an eruption.
Right, I was looking into that, and it was like 5 years later or something.
So the Tangiwai disaster is an example of a lahar occurring without an eruption. And so for that specific event, the eruption of 1945, much like the eruptions of 95, 96, really just deposited volcanic material on the crater rim and created like a dam of water that, eventually was released later on down the track.
So with that, the eruption's done, it's, 5 years ago or whatever, and then the Tangiwai disaster was that train going along and the lahar suddenly exploded. That's what happened.
Yeah.
Is it?
Explode is probably not the right word, but the dam broke and the water flowed down the mountain.
So is there any way that we have learnt since those days to predict a post-eruption lahar?
Absolutely. And so the event of the Tangiwai disaster informed our response to the lahar that occurred on the 18th of March 2007. And so, I think one of the key things about our role, the role that I hold in our predecessors, is really understanding the history and the lessons there so that they can inform how we respond to those kinds of events in the future, because it will happen again. There are lots of lessons to be learned with eruptions.
Definitely. What's something about volcanoes that blew your mind when you learned it?
So when I was 10 and living in Taupo, I learned about the mana and the power of a volcano through our korauā, our Ruapehu erupting, and being at school, at Taupo Primary School, and, seeing the sky black. Those are things that not many people around New Zealand probably experience if you weren't alive or living in Taupo or other locations during that time. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to witness.
Yeah, and probably quite formative for you as well. Did that make you go into this career path?
Yeah, interesting. So I have a story that I'll say all the time. So my mum is someone who keeps everything. So all our books and all our pictures that we, drew as kids. And I have a volcano picture of a picture that I drew when I was 10, 11, 12, and I use that in some of my presentations to articulate, this event, these series of eruptions that occurred at that time helped me, I guess, subconsciously to love science, love learning about volcanic eruptions, love understanding volcanoes. And I remember writing something like, I want to be a volcanologist when I grow up. And so those are the little cool gems that exist in I guess, my upbringing. And my mum's real cool because she keeps stuff like that. And then when, I came over to Te Papa Atawhai, she reminded me that that's something that I had actually wanted to be when I was younger.
Oh, good on you, Mum. Thanks for saving it.
Yeah, she's cool.
Hollei, what's your public service announcement or kind of call to action reminder for the public as weather starts to maybe warm up and more people are getting out into nature?
I think preparation is key, making sure first and foremost you are dressed appropriately for the track or hike you are accessing, making sure you have enough food and water, sunscreen, and that you have everything on you in the event of weather turning particularly, and having fun.
Hollei, I could talk to you all day, but I am not allowed to because you need to go and give your expertise around volcanic risk for Aotearoa. So unfortunately, we have to end this episode, but what an episode. What amazing insight you have given. Thank you so much for taking your time. I feel like we've learned so much about volcanic history and the work being done now. I can probably look at the Banks Peninsula and tell you that it's 2 extinct volcanoes, not a caldera like I thought it was this morning. Thank you so much for being here with us.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Erica Wilkinson, and this has been the Doc Sounds of Science podcast. This show is available wherever you get your podcasts, or you can stream it off our website, doc.govt.nz. This show is produced by Jane Ramage with editing by Lucy Hollier. If you enjoyed this episode, show us some love with a 5-star rating.